begin our program this morning, I'd like to just say a few words. This is obviously, for most of us here, a little bit of a different Sunday in that it is the anniversary of Swami Kriyananda's Discipleship Day. It just hit me this morning in a way that it hasn't in years before, although we've always celebrated it. We've always honored Swamiji on this day. What a truly sacred day this is for all of us. Sai Ganesh spoke to some of this before the fire ceremony, but what a momentous occasion it was. Had Swamiji not been who he was, not been listening with what Christ called, had ears to hear, but it's really that deep intuition in all of us. Had he not read autobiography and then the very next day gotten on that bus, and had he not told us that story over and over and over and over again. And I've asked myself many times with the few stories that Swamiji did tell that many times, why? Why did he keep sharing that particular story with us? Not to show us what a great soul he was, that he read the book and knew and got on the bus, but to show us what it means to listen, heart, mind, and soul, to really hear what is nothing short of a deep call within. And from that moment on, to have lived his life, every moment of his life, such that everything we now know spiritually, everything, the shape of our temples, the colors, the music, the deep inspiration, and really, maybe more than anything, how we too can be great disciples. All started, well, it started with his birth, but it really manifested in those moments. And on September 12th, when he was able to look at Paramahansa Yogananda, a great avatar, and say to him, first words out of his mouth, I want to be your disciple. Really showing us the way, exemplifying, this is the way we live discipleship. This is the way we see how to move towards God, to find God within, with all of those spiritual qualities that he lived: courage, compassion, steadfastness, spiritual power, and on and on. This is a sacred day for all of us in all of our lives, and we've decided to bring that celebration this morning together with our Sunday service, so it'll be a little different. We'll hear a lot of Swamiji's voice, a little less of our own. Of course, all of his music, but in lieu of our usual readings, Swamiji will read, Swamiji will sing. I'll read something that Swamiji wrote. Asha will give a talk. But again, you'll notice it's a little different, but will not be hard to follow along. And I'm sure because of that which we are speaking to today will be very inspiring for all of us.
Listen, listen, whispering within your soul, hints of laughter, hints of joy, sweet songs of sadness, of quenchless yearning for the light. for my love, your true home. Long your heart has played the dance, and long you've toyed with merest shadows of the treasures left behind you, deep in your soul. Long you've plumbed the dark for answers, long you've begged from beggars' empty hands. Gifts of life they too were seeking, gifts none could share. Friend, how long will you wander? Friend, as long as you seek your home in a land where all are strangers, love locks the door. Leave to the weakest craven life, to the coward leave his dreaming. Oh, my saint, wake up, reclaim the light, seek the truth behind all seeming. Lead to the weakest craven life, to the coward leave his dreaming. Oh, my saint, wake up, reclaim the light, seek the truth behind all seeming. Turn, turn, turn within, in silence of soul, in cave of love, find my abode. Listen, whispering within your soul, hints of laughter, hints of joy, sweet songs of sadness, of quenchless yearning for thy light, for my love, and your true home.
When I awake, I'll see thy face. When I awake, I'll see thy light. When I awake, I'll see thy face. When I awake, I'll see thy light. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. Hand in hand we're dancing together in thy light. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. Hand in hand we're dancing together in thy light. Dancing together in thy light. Dancing together in thy light. When I awake, I'll end all sorrows. When I awake, I'll find thy joy. When I awake, I'll end all sorrows. When I awake, I'll find thy joy. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy joy. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy joy, dancing together in thy joy. Mother, awake me from my dreams, Mother, awake me in thy joy. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy joy, dancing together in thy joy, dancing together in thy joy, dancing together in thy joy. When I awake, I'll end all fears. When I awake, I'll know thy love. When I awake, I'll end all fears. When I awake, I'll know thy love. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy love. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy love. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy love. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy love. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy love, dancing together in thy love. When I awake, I'll see thy face. When I awake, I'll see thy light. When I awake, I'll see thy face. When I awake, I'll see thy light. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy light, dancing together in thy light. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy light, dancing together in thy light. When I awake, I'll end all sorrows. When I awake, I'll find thy joy. When I awake, I'll end all sorrows. When I awake, I'll find thy joy. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy joy. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy joy. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy joy. Hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy joy, dancing together in thy joy, dancing together in thy joy. Hand in hand we're dancing together, hand in hand we're dancing together, hand in hand we're dancing together, dancing together in thy joy, dancing together in thy joy. When I awake, I'll end all fears. When I awake, I'll know thy love. When I awake, I'll end all fears. When I awake, I'll know thy love. Mother, awake Hand in hand we're dancing together. 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 Dancing together in thy love. Dancing together in thy love. Hand in hand we're dancing together. Dancing together in thy love. Dancing together in thy love. I have been roaming, I have been roaming, forsaken by thee, who hast seen me groping, hardly ever answering. I shall be roaming, roaming, I shall be roaming, roaming, bursting all boundaries of heart, evermore moving towards thee, to thy vast and throbbing heart. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, I have been roaming, I have been roaming, forsaken by thee, who hast seen me groping, hardly ever answering. I shall be roaming, roaming, I shall be roaming, roaming, bursting all boundaries of heart, evermore moving towards thee, to thy vast and throbbing heart. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, I have been roaming, I have been roaming, forsaken by thee, who hast seen me groping, hardly ever answering. I shall be roaming, roaming, I shall be roaming, roaming, bursting all boundaries of heart, evermore moving towards thee, to thy vast and throbbing heart. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, searching searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams. I have been roaming, I have been roaming, forsaken by thee, who hast seen me groping, hardly ever answering. I shall be roaming, roaming, I shall be roaming, roaming, bursting all boundaries of heart, evermore moving towards thee, to thy vast unthrobbing heart. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams.
Let's meditate together now for a few minutes, allowing the beautiful vibration of the chant of Swamiji's voice filling us with the same longing and clear determination that he sings of in this chant, bringing our awareness to the point between the eyebrows, meditating together for just a few minutes. Keeping our consciousness uplifted, our awareness at the point between the eyebrows. Let's listen to these words written by Swami Kriyananda on our affirmation for the week of God Remembrance. To remember God means not only to think of him constantly, but to realize that finding him is an act of remembrance truly. For it is from him that we have come. When the clouds of delusion evaporate from our minds, what will be left is what was there always, hidden behind the clouds, the blazing sun of divine consciousness. One should not strain nor reach outward mentally to think of God. Know that he has been yours always, nearer than your nearest thoughts and feelings, nearer than the very prayers you offer him. Think not merely about him, think to him. Share with him your passing feelings, your idlest fancy. Talk with him. Practice his presence, at first perhaps for minutes a day, then for hours, and then all the time. Let's repeat this affirmation together. We do it first in a very outward way, voices loud, but always with inward energy, and slowly we'll draw that energy more and more inward. I will live in the remembrance of what I am in truth.
I will
Bliss, infinite, eternal love. I will live in the remembrance of what I am in truth. Bliss, infinite, eternal love. And now with a quieter voice, I will live in the remembrance of what I am in truth. Bliss, infinite, eternal love. And in a whisper, I will live in the remembrance of what I am in truth. Bliss, infinite, eternal love. And now silently, but keeping our energy raised and strong, I will live in the remembrance of what I am in truth. Bliss, infinite, eternal love. And now please listen to this prayer. Lord, Thou art always with me. Help me to feel behind my thoughts Thy inspiration, behind my every emotion, Thy calm, all-transforming love.
Come here while I sing you of emerald hills, of valleys and meadows so fair, that all who have seen them have carried away memories in their hearts, friends, like the lilacs of May. Oh, my song is the story of the lilacs of May. My song is the story of deer on the hills, of larks that soar seeking the sun, of nightingales lifting the curtain of night, as with music they bring down heaven's blessing of light. Oh, my song is the story of God's blessing of light. Come join me in singing of that emerald isle, of flowers that like jewels besprinkle the lea, of waterfalls eager to embrace the wide sea, as we with our Maker united would be, as we with our Maker reunited would be. Come here while I sing you of emerald hills, of valleys and meadows so fair, that all who have seen them have carried away memories in their hearts, friends, of the lilacs of May. Oh, my song is the story of the lilacs of May.
This reading are the opening pages of Swamiji's book, The New Path, literally from the first chapter. Pilgrim whittles his staff. There are times when a human being, though perhaps not remarkable in himself, encounters some extraordinary person or event that infuses his life with great meaning. My own life, Swamiji wrote, was blessed with such an encounter more than 60 years ago in 1948, right here in America, of all lands, the epitome of bustling efficiency, material progressiveness, and pragmatic know-how. I met a great God-known master whose constant vision was of eternity. His name was Paramahansa Yogananda. He was from India, though it would be truer to say that his home was the whole world. Had anyone suggested to me prior to that meeting that so much radiance, dynamic joy, unaffected humility, and love might be found in a single human being, I would have replied, though perhaps with a sigh of regret, that such perfection is not attainable by man. And had anyone suggested to me further that divine miracles have occurred in this scientific age, I would have laughed outright. For in those days, proud as I was in my intellectual 20th century wisdom, I mocked even the miracles of the Bible. No longer. I have seen things that made a mockery of mockery itself. I know now from personal experience that divine wonders do occur on earth, and I believe that the time is approaching when countless men and women will no more think of doubting God than they doubt the air they breathe. For God is not dead. It is only man who dies to all that is wonderful in life when he limits himself to worldly acquisitions and to advancing himself in worldly eyes, but overlooks those spiritual realities which are the foundation of all that he truly is. Paramahansa Yogananda often spoke of America's high spiritual destiny. When first I heard him do so, I marveled, America? All that I knew of this country was its materialism, its competitive drive, its smug, no-nonsense attitude toward anything too subtle to be measured with scientific instruments. But in time, that great teacher made me aware of another aspect, an undercurrent of divine yearning, not in our intellectuals perhaps, our self-styled cultural representatives, but in the hearts of the common people. The vision of the future he presented to us was of a state of world brotherhood in which all men would live together in harmony and freedom. As a step toward this universal fulfillment, he urged those people who were free to do so to band together into what he called world colony brotherhoods, world brotherhood colonies, little spiritual communities where people living and working together with others of like mind would develop an awareness of the true kinship of all men as sons and daughters of the same one God. It has been my own lot to found the first such world brotherhood colonies, examples of what Yogananda predicted would someday become thousands of such communities the world over. It was to the divine aspirations of these pioneers of the spirit that Paramahansa Yogananda was responding by coming to America. Americans, he said, were ready to learn meditation and God communion through the practice of the ancient science of yoga. It was in the capacity of one of modern America's greatest exponents of yoga that he was sent by his great teachers to the West. And now, just a 2-sentence excerpt from a chapter in The Path. When he was visiting with his old college friend, Rod, he said, one day, as I was reading a book, a sudden inspiration came to me with complete certainty. I felt its truth on some deep level of my consciousness. Stunned at the depth of my conviction, I said to Rod, I'm going to be a spiritual teacher. Don't be silly, he snorted, not at all impressed. Very well, I thought. I'll say no more, but I know.
How Norman's description of Mount Washington attracted me. I simply had to become part of this wonderful way of life. It was where I belonged. It was my home. Norman pointed out 2 young men sitting quietly farther back in the church. They want to join too, he remarked. How long have they been waiting? Oh, not long, a few months. Disconsolately, I wandered about a while longer. Finally, it occurred to me, novel thought, that perhaps I simply wasn't ready, and that for this reason the doors weren't opening for me. If this were true, I decided, I'd just go live in the hills near Hollywood, come to the services regularly, study the lessons, and I sighed, wait. When I was ready, the Master would know it and would summon me. With this resolution in mind, and with no small disappointment in my heart, I made for the door. No doubt I'd needed this lesson in humility. Perhaps things had always gone too easily for me. Perhaps I was too confident. At any rate, the moment I accepted the thought that I actually might not be spiritually ready, the situation changed dramatically. I had reached the door when the secretary, Mary Hammond I later learned her name was, came up from behind me. Since you've come such a long way, she said, I'll just ask Master if he'd be willing to see you today. She returned a few minutes later. Master will see you next. A moment later, the Master and I were alone. What large, lustrous eyes now greeted me. What a compassionate smile. Never before had I seen such divine beauty in a human face. The Master seated himself on a chair and motioned me to a sofa beside him. What may I do for you? For the 3rd time that day, these same gentle words, but this time how fraught with meaning. I want to be your disciple. The reply welled up irresistibly from my heart. Never had I expected to utter such words to another human being. The Master smiled gently. There ensued a long discussion interspersed by long silences, during which he held his eyes half open, half closed, reading me as I well knew. Over and over again in my heart I prayed desperately, you must take me. I know that you know my thoughts. I can't say it outwardly, I'd only weep, but you must accept me, you must. Early in the conversation he told me, I agreed to see you only because Divine Mother told me to. I want you to know that. It isn't because you've come from so far. 2 weeks ago, a lady flew here all the way from Sweden after reading my book, but I wouldn't see her. I do only what God tells me to. He reiterated, Divine Mother told me to see you. There followed some discussion of my past. He appeared pleased with my replies and with my truthfulness. I knew that already, he once remarked, indicating that he was only testing me to see if I would answer him truthfully. Again, a long silence, while I prayed ardently to be accepted. I am taking fewer people now, he said. I gulped. Was this remark intended to prepare me for a letdown? I told him I simply could see nothing for myself in marriage or in a worldly life. I'm sure it's fine for many people, I said, but I don't want it for myself. He shook his head. It isn't as fine for anybody as people like to make out. God for everyone is the only answer. He went on to tell me a few stories of the disillusionments he had witnessed. Then again, silence. At one point in our discussion, he asked me how I had liked his book. Oh, it was wonderful. That's because it has my vibrations in it, he replied simply. Vibrations? I'd never thought of books as possessing vibrations before. But clearly I had found his book almost alive in its power to convey not merely ideas, but new states of awareness. Incongruously, even absurdly, it now occurred to me that he might be more willing to take me if he felt I could be of some practical use to his work. And what did I know? Only writing. But that surely was better than nothing. Perhaps he had a need for people with writing skills. To demonstrate my ability, I said, Sir, I found several split infinitives in your book. A 22-year-old, literarily untried, but already a budding editor. I've never lived down this faux pas. But Master took it with a surprised, then a humorous smile. The motive for my remark was transparent to him. More silence, more prayers. All right, he said at last, you have good karma, you may join us. Oh, but I can wait, I blurted out, hoping he wasn't taking me only because I hadn't yet found any other place to stay. No, he smiled. You have good karma, otherwise I wouldn't accept you. Gazing at me with deep love, he then said, I give you my unconditional love. Immortal promise. I couldn't begin to fathom the depth of meaning in those marvelous words. Will you give me your unconditional love? Yes. And will you also give me your unconditional obedience? Desperate though my desire was to be accepted by him, I wanted to be utterly honest. Suppose I asked sometime, I think you're wrong. I will never ask anything of you, he replied solemnly, that God does not tell me to ask. He continued, when I met my master, Sri Yukteswar, he said to me, allow me to discipline you. Why, sir? I inquired. Because, he answered, in the beginning of the spiritual path, one's will is guided by whims and fancies. Mine was, too, until I met my guru, Lahiri Mahashai. It was only when I attuned my will to his wisdom-guided will that I found true freedom. In the same way, if you will tune your will to mine, you too will find freedom. To act only on the inspiration of whims and fancies is not freedom, but bondage. Only by doing God's will can you become truly free.
"I see," I replied thoughtfully. Then from my heart I said, "I give you my unconditional obedience." He went on to give me various instructions. "Now then, come kneel before me." I did so. He made me repeat in the name of God, Jesus Christ, and the others in our line of gurus, the vows of discipleship and of renunciation. Next, he placed the forefinger of his right hand on my chest over the heart. For at least 2 minutes his arm vibrated almost violently. Incredibly, from that moment onward, my consciousness in some all-penetrating manner was transformed. I left his interview room in a daze. Norman, on hearing the news of my acceptance, embraced me lovingly. It was unusual, to say the least, for a disciple to be accepted so soon. A few moments later, Master came out from behind the open curtain on the lecture platform. Smiling at us quietly, he said, "We have a new brother."
This last Friday evening, I gave what I do a couple of times a month, a webinar on one of the verses. It was in chapter 5, but I don't remember the exact verse now. But it was a wonderful verse, because it said, even the wise become confused by the multifarious, impossible to decipher nature of this world. Then we can't tell right from wrong. And that's what this giant story of being on this planet is all about. Being in the material plane, the inherently within us is this divine reality, but we get caught up in the Maya, and then we can't tell right from wrong. And right from wrong is not about damnation, it's not about going to hell or heaven or anything like that. Right is that which leads us to happiness, and wrong is that which leads us to misery. We only have to look back at our own lives, however long or short they are. We only have to look around at the world for a minute to see that many people are driving themselves to misery and very few are going toward happiness. True, lasting, not pleasure, not a moment of relief, but that which is really freedom. Freedom being to always choose that which will bring us joy. And when Swami goes through the commentary, a page and a half or so of commentary on that, he goes through all the reasons why we get confused. And he talks about ego identity is the primary reason why we have so much trouble, because we believe ourselves to be individual and separate. We do not know ourselves as we truly are, which is pure expressions of the Spirit. The Gita verse says, even though within each of us the divine lives, we lose track of that. So when Swami's explaining that whole cycle, and he's talking about how this mistaken identity that we have is really the source of our downfall, he makes a further statement, and he says the problem is that that very ego, which is also our friend, because it gives us the capacity to reflect on our experiences and to notice, to begin to notice that that which I think is right turns out not to be so. And then we make an effort, but we continually get swept into this. But if we try sincerely, continuously, courageously, and no matter how many setbacks we have, we keep persevering and trying to find the truth, we reach the point. Now, Swami didn't put it this way, but he put it this way when he just spoke to us just now, where we have the very, very, very good karma to attract to ourselves a Satguru. Because then the Guru can inspire us to attune our vibration to his vibration. And when we come into attunement with him, his power lifts us out of it. And we can't. This is just the divine law of Sanatana Dharma. The ego can bring itself to the point where its longing for freedom is so intense that the Guru, we can hear the Guru's voice, we can see his presence. We don't meet him physically except every once in a while, but we can feel his vibration, and we are desperate enough that we will abandon, at least for long enough to make the connection. And the Guru is there, and then his power lifts us. We put ourselves into attunement with him, but then it's his power that moves us. It was a characteristic of Swamiji's life at the end, I don't know how many years, but very dramatically in the last years of his life. No matter what the subject was, he would tell us again. He read autobiography, he got on the bus, he went in front of Master. And what was so profoundly moving about that experience was that for Swamiji, he never told the story as if he'd ever told it before. Now, however many times we heard it, which was never too many, he would talk about it because there he was to help us to become free. That was the only reason he was sitting there. And his consciousness would simply float to what he really had to tell us about how we were going to become free. And every time it would just be, his face would light up, his energy would come to a focus. Very often he would cry. And then he would just, without any hurry, you know how often when we're telling a story that we think people may have heard before, or we're a little insecure about what we're doing. I know you all have heard this before, you know, like this, and we skip over the salient part so as not to bore our audience. Never. Swami never had the slightest concern. He was certain that we were as enamored of that story as he was. It was also, for those of us who saw him in other contexts and met him more than once, especially if I go all the way back to the beginning, which was almost another planet from this one, he had a different job to do. And among other things, he had to communicate Master's message of self-realization. When I was first invited by Swamiji to travel some in India and begin to give a few programs over there. And I had to get accustomed to a new culture. I'm not unlike Swami, who just grew up all over Europe and had multiple languages. I'm a very American person, and this is where I was. And even though I had traveled in India, I am not a multicultural person by experience. And there was a natural inhibition in speaking to people who had grown up with this teaching, whereas to us it had just been brought really by Master, but delivered by Swamiji, sitting for years and years all over America with Swami, listening to him teach, and hearing him, just start from the ground of this very materialistic upbringing that all of us had had. And in those years, it was almost always very American audiences in the first 20 years or so, because the world hadn't quite gone into this wonderful melting pot that we've really become. So the only way I knew self-realization was the way Swami had expressed it to me. So I came to India, and people had many ideas and knew infinitely more about everything that was culturally related. We're fortunate to have Sai Ganesh with us, who can pronounce the Sanskrit words properly and knows all the characters, and just because of his upbringing, and many of others of you now, you know all of this. So I was a little intimidated until I realized that Master's was a new expression. And I didn't know a great deal of what was being shared with me, and I found very interesting. And it took me a little while to realize, but I have something else to say. Because as Swami asked Master, is this a new religion? No, he said, but it is a new expression. This is Dwapara Yuga, this is a new expression. This is the original teachings of Krishna, this is the original teachings of Jesus, and we're here to do something else. And so in those first years when Swamiji was teaching, and he was just trying to get us to understand, I remember when I first began to comprehend the chakras. Chakras are very fundamental, but it was at least 15 years, maybe 20 years, when Swami spent a whole spiritual renewal week teaching us what the chakras were about. And from that point it was, oh, okay, now I understand this. But I mean, that's what I'm talking about, is long, different. And he had to focus like that because he was trying to bring us to the point where we realized, smart as we were, and we were crackerjack smart, we were a very bright, determined, energetic, truth-seeking crowd. But the ego is corrupted by the water that it's been fed on, its whole reality. And there's this other odd character that you're right. Something inside of me knows that you're not. There's something fundamentally wrong with the entire premise of the way most of the people in this world live. I mean, we can love them as children of God. We can be friends. We can be their children and their siblings. We're not here to judge. But there's a point where the soul understands, I need something characteristic about the spiritual path, which is you have to have a lot. I'm sorry if you're powerful and you're rich and you have all these ways that you can try to tell me else. What is day to the worldly man is night to the yogi. And Swamiji had to get all of that across to us in such a way that we would really be able to stand strong and change our vibration to what it needed to be so that the Master could help us. But all of that All of that teaching, all those thousands of hours of classes, was Swamiji just putting out, and I think I see it in a cumulative way, because he was always working, with this astral causal realm. You know, the world is run from the realm of ideas, and then those ideas gain energy. And when that energy is really strong enough, the world begins to shift. You know, I've mentioned to you all, and some of you have seen it, because you're as old as I am and you've seen it. Meditation was so obscure and so weird when we started this. And now everybody knows about it. In California, as I say, not everybody meditates, but if you don't, you feel guilty. Because you know you should. Think about that. Right? And in mainstream movies, they can make all these jokes about the Pixar movie Soul, which I thought was so exceedingly clever. They have this extremely goofy character in there who, you know, goes into meditation states and then travels into the astral world. This is mainstream. From the causal to the astral, and now Pixar materializes this whole world, and the whole world knows what they're talking about. You see, this is how change really happens. And right now we're in this terrible mess as a planet, but lately God's been sending me all these positive pictures of all the solutions that people have to, you know, to starvation, to climate change. It's all out there. It's all ready to happen. It's just on the edge, but it's a battle on the causal and the astral plane between light and darkness, because that's the shadow and the light are playing together all the time. And Swami was always from the causal. Get the ideas out, put out the energy. He said, I was fortunate to be one of those who started the first brotherhood community. Why was he inspired to start it? Because Master was putting out the idea on the causal plane and getting it very strong on the astral plane. Then Swami brought it out on the material plane. But once his own incredible work was finished, and the first sort of like opening paragraph in the book I wrote about Swamiji, it was so important to me. Because he asked me to speak about him and to write about him from the very beginning, he always wanted to make sure that I understood him properly, and God knows I wanted to make sure that I understood him properly. So he allowed me to ask him questions, which he almost always answered, and he would tell me what he was thinking and why. And he would allow me to sit in the corner of the room when I didn't really have any other reason to be there and just watch him interact. And then I would have these intuitive ideas about what he was doing, and I could ask him afterwards. When I had to write, when I had the opportunity to write Swami Kriyananda as we have known him, I got all these experiences from other people and from myself, but in order to universalize them, I often had to explain, what was Swami doing? Why was he doing it? And as I worked on that book, I just had I made all these decisions about what Swami was doing and why he was doing it and what this meant and so on like that, because I knew he would read it, so before it was published. And then he invited me, just when I was coming to the close of that, he invited me to come to India where he was living. I lived there for 3 weeks. I lived in the tent on the upstairs, on the roof of the house. They'd put a tent up, or sort of a cloth room is what I would call it. It was really for Jyotish and Devi when they came to visit, but I was staying in it during that time. I sat next to Swami and he turned every page of that manuscript. And sometimes we laughed quite delightedly at some of the stories that were in there. And I would watch him come to the parts where I had put the meaning and the explanation, and I would wait, because I had a long history of Swami throwing away my writing, so it was very comfortable that he was going to. And he would just turn the page. And that was so that I would trust that when I had finally wrote Light Bearer, because he wouldn't be here to read it, that I would really trust. Now, the reason I was saying all that, when he was in Los Angeles in, I think it was 2011, I think it was February of 2011, he died 2 years later. By that point, his whole way of expressing himself in the world had really shifted. And it was because the work was done. I mean, he was building a work in India. He was trying to get something really going in Los Angeles at that point. He was still working on screenplays. He never stopped. He just kept doing things. But his whole interface with the world had shifted. When Narayani came into his life, it shifted very radically because she had such an intuitive connection with him that he could surrender. Just essentially his interface with the world, he more or less surrendered to her. And she, as she writes in her book, Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him, she just knew what to do. She just knew what he would want. No one else that I knew could ever have acted. So she liberated him to a large extent, all the timing, liberated him from practical necessity. And he looked around and he could see that the great work Master had given him was more or less done. And he essentially, he just let the bliss in. Because as he had said many times before, Master himself told Swami he was going to keep it from him. As Swami said, Master tells me that I'm self-realized, but I don't know it. And that's exactly what he said, because and Swami put it essentially this way, if I had been able to go into high states of samadhi, I wouldn't have done any of this work. But Master wanted him to work like that. Interestingly, this is exactly what Ramakrishna said to Vivekananda. He put Vivekananda, when they first met, into an exalted state of samadhi. Vivekananda came from that exalted state, and it was like, what does this world matter to me anymore? This is how Ramakrishna puts it. He said, I have the key to those experiences for you, and I'm putting it in my pocket. And I'm going to keep it in my pocket because you have something else to do. But by the end of Swami's life, he'd done it. He'd gone through it, and he never spoke in terms of Master handing him the key back. But Swami's whole way of being just shifted. And he himself said, sometimes I feel so much bliss, I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do with it all. And that was when he began to cry so often in public, whereas prior to that he never did. His feelings were always it was very rare when you saw Swami break up with tears. At the end of his life, it was very rare if you didn't. He even said himself, he didn't read books anymore. He just would just be in that state. But when I met Swami, and one of the issues that I faced in writing about him was I wanted to give people something that would allow them to enter into the reality of his consciousness in some kind of progressive way. When he wrote The Path, and in the summer of 1976, yes, of course, he went to edit the book on the island of in Kona, on the Kona coast in Hawaii, because a friend gave him a place to stay. He went over there, and my friend Kalyani, who worked with Swami very closely, went with him first, and then a few weeks later he called me to come over there to work with him. Because what Swami was doing, part one of the book, he read it out loud. He had us read it out loud to him, and he listened to it. And in that way, he could tell as more from hearing it than just reading it if it was really done. Then he edited, we'd stop, we'd read, then he'd stop, and we'd edit, and I would type for him. So when we read the chapter, which is just the chapter that we were listening to, and except the earlier part of it, where he's in New York, he reads the autobiography, he waits one day, he comes across the country, he meets Master, I want to be your disciple, yes, you're a disciple, like this. By this point, I'd been 15, less than that. I'd been many less than that, 76. I'd been 5 years only at Ananda. But I was already in contact with many, many, many people coming to retreat and so on like that. I had a point of view. I said, Swamiji, in a certain way, it's unfortunate that this happened for you this way, because this is not how it happens for almost anyone. Almost everyone hears a little bit, thinks about it, hesitates, tests it out, pulls back, then comes. People are going to think if they don't recognize Master's picture on the cover of the book and 4 days later are a disciple, there's something wrong with them. And Swami was so thoughtful about everything. He said, yes, I know. He said, I've tried to think if there was another way I could tell the story, that people could identify more with the story and realize, that this is their story as well. And he just shook his head, but I can't, because that's how it happened. And he said it's a shortcoming. It's a shortcoming of making the story of Master his own autobiography, but he had to tell the story as it was. And my issue, when it came time for me to do this, was that my relationship with Swami was formed instantly. Of course, thank God, I learned something over the years, and I began to understand much more deeply and profoundly what it meant. But literally, the first time I saw him, it was just that, and I felt his consciousness. I just felt, and the words were, he has no boundary. Everybody has an edge, It's like their aura goes to here. I felt Swami's aura as strong in front of my eyes as it was across the room, and I felt it go through me to who knows where. And that never shifted. So I said to him on this, in 2011, Swamiji, because I was thinking about writing again always, Swamiji, people ask me if you have changed since I first met you, which is an obvious question. It was 40 years at that point. And I said, well, this is what I'm testing this in front of Swami. Sir, the way you express yourself has changed. But I feel like your consciousness has been exactly the same from the first moment I met you. And then I said, Swami, can I say that? Because this had been a conversation we'd had before. There was one thing in the book that I wrote that he said, yes, it's true, but you can't say it. And so I said, can I say it? And just very quietly and very naturally he said, yes, you can, because it's true. That's why he picked up autobiography. That's why he was able to do what he was, because he was another order of magnitude. And then he put on the costume. I'm Swami Kriyananda. I'm an articulate American with multiple talents who speaks many languages, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And then he'd done it. And then what he did is he fell back into who he really was, which is, as his self-image was a little boy. Because what it looked like to be a grown man was to be like Master. And so in front of Master, which he had that picture, his discipleship started. Master said, kneel before me. So Master knelt before him, touched him in the heart, and Swami said from that moment, in some way, in some all-pervasive way, his consciousness was changed. Swami's entire life was kneeling before Master, having the touch. Because we go through all of this to get to the point where we're able to do that, and God recognizes it. So that's what we celebrate. We celebrate for each one of us the ever-renewed capacity to kneel in front of the Master and say, I want to be your disciple. God bless you.
Love is all I know, sun rays on the snow of a winter long, in darkness without song. Oh, my heart's afire, burning all desire. Only you remain, and life again. Too long I did stray, flung lifetimes away, imagined you did not care. I know now your smile was mine all the while. I listened and love was there. I can't breathe for love, all the stars above call to me, come home. Life's waves all end in foam, only love can heal all the pain I feel. What a fool was I to turn away. Love is all I know, sun rays on the snow of a winter long, in darkness without song. Oh, my heart's afire, burning all desire. Only you remain, and life again. Too long I did stray, flung lifetimes away, imagined you did not care. I know now your smile was mine all the while. I listened and love was there. I can't breathe for love, all the stars above call to me, come home. Life's waves all end in foam, only love can heal all the pain I feel. What a fool was I to turn away.